You have to understand, my house isn't just a house. It's a system. My system. I'm a software architect, you see. So that's how my brain works. Everything is a system, and every system can be perfected. I didn't just buy a place to live. I designed an environment. I engineered it for quiet, for order, for peace. The way the lights shift throughout the day, mimicking the sun perfectly, so you barely notice the transition from afternoon to evening. That's a system. The way the air stays at the exact same temperature and humidity, no matter what's happening outside, that's another one. Every part of this place, right down to the circuits in the walls, is designed to execute its functions silently, efficiently, perfectly. And the security, well, that's the master system. It's not about loud alarms or anything so crude. It's a quiet observer, a constant stream of data, logging everything, noticing every little change without judgment. It's a digital fortress. I built it to be a buffer against the chaos of the outside world. I really thought I had accounted for everything. Every possible point of failure, every vulnerability. I was confident, the kind of confidence you have when you've personally checked every line of code, every connection. But I learned something tonight. The most dangerous threats, they don't exploit a flaw in your code. They don't come through the network. They come walking right up to your front door, smiling. And they weaponize the one thing you can't program a defense against: human nature. Tonight, the piece I built wasn't just disturbed, it was targeted. It was a planned demolition. And the person holding the detonator was my neighbor. I was in my study, my sanctuary within the sanctuary, and the only light was the cool, calm glow from my monitors. I was deep in it, deep in the flow, just tracing lines of logic, building something elegant and complex out of pure code. The outside world, all its messiness and noise, it just ceases to exist in those moments. There's only the work. And then, it happened. A sound. A sound so completely wrong, so alien to this space, that my brain literally took a second to catch up. It was a violation, not a knock. No, a knock is a request. This was a demand, a heavy, sickening thudding. It was a raw physical assault on the front door, on the frame, on the entire structure of my quiet world. Boom, boom, boom. Each hit was a shockwave. I felt it through the floor, up my chair, a deep, ugly vibration that felt like it was trying to shake the whole house apart. My monitors were still glowing. The code was still there, but the spell was broken. The sanctity of the space was just gone, shattered, replaced by this horrible, primitive rhythm. It was the sound of the outside world, the chaos I'd worked so hard to keep at bay, just hammering to get in. My heart just started hammering in my chest. A frantic, panicked beat that was completely out of sync with the pounding on the door. I got up, moved out of the study, and my feet were silent on the cold hardwood floors. That's when I saw it. The colors. Flashing red and blue lights slicing across my living room walls. It was frantic, throwing everything into sharp, monstrous relief. The bookshelf, my favorite chair, they were all part of this silent, strobing horror show. The pounding got louder, and then a voice cut through it all. It was metallic, amplified, and completely impersonal. "Police! We're here for a wellness check." The words just didn't compute. They floated in the air, nonsensical. A wellness check? For what? For who? For me? My wellness is a constant. It's the baseline of my entire life. It was a total contradiction. You don't check on someone's well-being by trying to break their door down. You don't show up with flashing lights that make it look like a major crime has happened. My mind was just spinning, trying to find a logical explanation. Wrong house? A terrible mistake? But no, the lights were centered on my house. The pounding was on my door. Adrenaline just flooded my system, cold and sharp. The initial shock started to wear off, and this deep, profound sense of wrongness took its place. This wasn't right. Something was very, very wrong here. I made it to the front door, and my hand just hovered over the lock for a moment. I leaned into the peephole, and the view was this warped, nightmarish bubble of light and shadow. I could see the officers, but their faces were just distorted shapes in the chaos of the flashing lights. They looked formidable, solid. This was real. This wasn't some dream. I took a breath, trying to steady myself, and unlocked the deadbolt, opening the door just a crack, leaving the chain on. The night air felt cold. It smelled like my neighbor's lawn, freshly cut. I could hear the low hum of the police car's engine. Before I could even ask what was going on, the officer in front started talking. He was all business, a little impatient maybe, and he said they'd received a call, a report, from a neighbor, my neighbor, Grant. And just like that, my blood ran cold. It felt like all the warmth just drained out of me. Of all the scenarios that had been flying through my head, this was the one that made a horrible, sickening kind of sense. Grant. The guy who always seemed to be sizing up my property when he waved hello. The one who talked about being good neighbors while his eyes were doing calculations on my fence line. The man who seemed personally offended by my quiet, private life. The officer just kept talking, his voice flat as he relayed the information he'd been given by the concerned man who lived right next door. "He said you might be in distress," the officer said, his eyes scanning me, looking for any sign to confirm the story he'd been told. That you were unstable. Unstable. That word. It just hung there in the air between us. It was so ugly, so clinical, and so incredibly precise. And in that one instant, the fog of confusion just burned away. It was replaced by this cold, hard certainty that settled deep in my stomach. This was no mistake. It was no misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was an attack. And my mind just started replaying every little interaction I'd ever had with Grant. The comments about my beautiful oak tree casting a shadow on his precious solar panels. The time he conveniently found an old, inaccurate survey map that suggested my fence was on his property. All the little notes, the passive-aggressive complaints. Taken one by one, they were just annoying, suburban friction. But now, seeing them all together, illuminated by these flashing police lights, a clear and ugly pattern emerged. This was his next move. He tried to get what he wanted with hints and veiled threats, and it hadn't worked. So he escalated. He decided to use his system I trust, the system of law and order, as a weapon against me. He wasn't just an annoying neighbor. He was something much, much worse. I could just picture him, over there in his dark house, watching this whole thing play out. He wouldn't be obvious about it, of course. He'd be peeking from behind a curtain, just a shadow, savoring the chaos he'd unleashed. He found a loophole, not in my digital fortress, but in the social one. He was weaponizing concern. And it was a horribly brilliant move. He understood how the world works. He knew there are certain words that act like triggers. Distress, unstable, nuisance. You say those words to the right people, and it forces a response. It bypasses all the nuance and doubt because they have to take it seriously. He didn't have to invent some complicated lie that could be picked apart. No, he just had to feed the system the keywords it's designed to respond to. He painted a picture of me as this fragile, unpredictable woman, a danger to myself, a problem for the neighborhood. He was using the police as his own personal delivery service for cruelty. The point wasn't to check on my wellness. The point was to create a record, to have an official report questioning my stability, something he could use down the line in his little war over a few feet of property. It was just breathtakingly evil to twist a system meant for protection into a tool for harassment. While the officers were still talking, still trying to get a read on me, something inside me just shifted. The shock, the adrenaline, the anger, it all just started to recede. And something else took its place. A kind of clean, cold stillness. The part of my brain that had been knocked offline by the violence of it all came back online. The architect took over. I designed systems for a living. And in the world I operate in, stories don't mean anything. Feelings, accusations, narratives, it's all just noise. The only thing that has any value is the record, the proof, the immutable log, the verifiable data. Grant's entire plan was built on a story, a fiction he whispered into the phone. He operates in that fuzzy, subjective world of manipulation and emotion, but he made one colossal mistake. He launched his narrative-based attack on a fortress that was built from the ground up on pure data. My house, my system, it logs everything. Every door opening, every change in temperature, every movement on the perimeter, it's all recorded, time-stamped, and stored. He thought this was his story against mine. He had no idea. I wasn't going to tell them a different story. I was going to show them the truth. Right then, a sharp burst of static came from the officer's radio. It was dispatch, calling back to confirm the details of the call. I heard my address, my name, and then I heard the piece of information that made the entire picture snap into perfect, horrifying focus. The dispatcher mentioned that the caller had connected and disconnected before finally staying on the line. He had practiced. He had rehearsed his lies to make them sound as genuine and concerned as possible. This wasn't a moment of panic on his part. This was a performance. He'd refined his script. That little detail, it was everything. It laid the premeditation bare. This was a calculated, cold-blooded operation. My focus just narrowed to a pinpoint. The police in front of me, the flashing lights, they all just faded into the background. They weren't the threat. They were just the tool. The real threat was the man next door and his disgusting little plan. And when you're facing a systemic threat, you respond with a systemic defense. My hand, which had been trembling just a little while ago, was perfectly steady now. I reached into my pocket, and my fingers wrapped around my phone. It wasn't just a phone. It was the master key to my entire world. My thumb moved across the screen, a motion I've made thousands of times. I tapped the icon for my home security system. The app opened, and my screen filled with a grid of silent, watching eyes. There was the front porch, where I was standing, the side of the house, the driveway, the back garden. Each little window was a crisp black and white feed from the night vision cameras. All the chaotic energy of the scene in front of me, the flashing lights, the tension, none of it existed on that screen. This was a world of pure, unadulterated information. It was the digital reflection of that cold stillness I was feeling inside. This was my territory. This was ground truth. And as I looked at those silent, ghostly images of my own home, the last of the emotional turmoil just evaporated. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a scared homeowner. I was the system administrator. And I was reviewing the system logs for an unauthorized access attempt. Grant thought he had me cornered, isolated. He had no clue that my fortress had eyes everywhere, and that they never, ever blink. I tapped the feed from the backyard, and it filled the screen. My garden shed, the dark shape of the oak tree, it all looked normal at first glance. I started scanning the edges of the frame, the way you scan lines of code for that one semicolon that's out of place. And then I saw it, an anomaly. A dark shape crouched down low by the side of my shed, almost perfectly hidden by a bush. To the human eye, he'd be nothing more than a shadow, but the infrared camera sees things differently. My breath just caught in my chest. I zoomed in, pinching the screen, and the image became crystal clear. It was a man, dressed all in black, and in his hand there was a glint of metal. I knew what it was instantly. It was a specialized tool for forcing open lockboxes, and he was using it on the lockbox attached to my shed, the one with the spare keys inside. It was happening right now, in real time. The whole thing, it was a setup. The wellness check wasn't just harassment, it was a diversion. It was a beautifully, horribly simple plan. Create a huge, loud distraction at the front of the house to keep me occupied, while his accomplice broke in through the back. The sheer audacity of it, the layers of deception, it was just staggering. Looking at that Lime video, watching a crime actively being committed against me, a crime orchestrated by my neighbor who was using the police as pawns, any little bit of fear I had left was just gone. It was like it was chemically burned away. And what was left was this absolute ice-cold resolve. This had gone so far beyond a squabble over a fence. This was a fundamental violation. Grant hadn't just told a lie. He had constructed an entire operation, a multi-pronged attack designed to rob me of my property, my safety, and my good name all in one night. He underestimated me so completely on every possible level. He looked at me and saw a quiet woman, a loner, an easy target. He didn't see the architect who lives and breathes systems. He didn't see the fortress she had built around herself. He thought his story, his little performance of concern, would be enough to break me, to send me into a panic. But a story is just air. It's temporary. What I was holding in my hand was data. It was light, converted to bits, time-stamped and stored. It was the record, and the record was about to speak. And its voice was going to be a hell of a lot louder than his. I looked up from the screen, right into the lead officer's eyes. He still had that look, cautious, skeptical, just trying to get through the call. He was operating on the only data he had, Grant's fiction. The story about the concerned neighbor and the unstable woman next door. And it was a good story. It was designed to get exactly this result. He had no reason not to believe it. But that was about to change. I didn't say a word. Words were Grant's weapon. Words were the source of the confusion. I wasn't going to fight his fire with my own. I just turned my phone around. I held it out so he could see the screen. On the one hand, you have his story. Invisible, unprovable, just words coming from a dark house. And on the other hand, you have this. A live, high-definition, time-stamped video of a felony in progress, a breaking and entering, happening right now, not that far from where we stood. There was nothing to argue, nothing to deny. There was only his story and the truth. The officer leaned in, his eyes glued to my phone. And for a second, the whole world just seemed to go quiet. I watched his face. I saw the professional mask just crack. His eyes widened. It was only for a split second, but it was everything. It was the look of a system receiving new, overriding data. You could literally see him processing it, realizing that the entire premise for him being on my porch was a lie. The whole situation just flipped 180 degrees in total silence. A moment ago, I was the unstable person being investigated. Now, I was the reliable source providing evidence of a crime. My silence was more powerful than any shouting match could ever be, because my silence was backed by the record, and the record was so much louder than Grant's lie. The officer looked from my phone to my face and back to the phone again, and the skepticism was gone. It was replaced by something else entirely: action. He didn't ask me another question. He didn't need to. The data was clear. He straightened up, turned away from me, and lifted his radio. And his voice, it was completely different. That tired, measured tone was gone. This was sharp, urgent, professional. "Dispatch," he said, and his voice cut right through the quiet night. "I need a unit to the rear of this address. We have a possible B&E in progress. Suspect is a male, dark clothing, currently tampering with a structure in the backyard." And just like that, the system that Grant had so cleverly manipulated, it pivoted. It snapped back to its real purpose, guided by the new, verified truth I had provided. It was no longer running on his malicious code. It was running on mine. I watched as the officers moved with this new, sharp purpose. Their attention was no longer on me. It was on the real threat. They were no longer the agents of my neighbor's harassment. They were agents of order again. I stepped back inside and watched the rest of it from my living room window. It was like watching a movie with the sound off. I saw the officers move around the side of my house, disappearing into the shadows. Then I saw the beams of their flashlights snap on, pinning the figure in my backyard. His hands went up instantly. A few moments later, another patrol car rolled up quietly. While some officers dealt with the accomplice, the other two walked right next door. They knocked on Grant's door. I saw it open, and there he was, standing in his brightly lit hallway, his face a perfect picture of manufactured concern. He was ready to play his part, the worried neighbor, but I saw the mask just melt off his face as the officer started talking to him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see it in his posture. The fake worry gave way to disbelief, then to sputtering denials, and then finally to this look of pure, indignant rage. It was the anger of a manipulator whose strings had just been cut. And then I watched as they let him out onto his own porch, his face a mask of shocked fury, and put his hands behind his back. The concerned neighbor was gone, and the conspirator was in handcuffs. I stayed at the window, just watching, until the last car pulled away. The red and blue lights that had started this whole nightmare just shrank into the darkness until they were gone. And then, silence. But it was a different kind of silence. The silence I had before was fragile. It was a piece that could be shattered by a single lie. This new silence felt solid. It wasn't just the lack of noise. It felt like the active presence of justice. It was the quiet that comes after a system has been tested, has identified a threat, and has successfully neutralized it. Order was restored, not just to my street, but to the world as it should be. The false data had been purged. The system had corrected. My fortress had been attacked, not with a battering ram, but with a lie. And it had held, because its walls weren't just made of wood and steel. They were made of data. And data, it turns out, is the strongest wall of all. The sun started coming up. I went out into my backyard. The grass was wet with dew. The air felt clean. The fence was right where it was supposed to be. Everything was in its place. The whole night felt like some kind of strange dream. But the evidence was real. It's funny when you think about it. Grant's whole plan was built on noise, a loud, frantic story designed to create confusion and panic. My entire defense was built on silence. The silent cameras, the silent logs, the silent act of just showing the truth instead of shouting a counter-narrative. He tried to win with a story. He lost to a fact. And maybe that's the real lesson here. We live in a world that is so full of noise, so full of people shouting their own versions of reality. But what's the real truth? What's the thing that lasts? It's the record. The quiet, unblinking, emotionless log of what actually happened. That's the weight of silence. It's the weight of proof. And that's the only thing you can really build a fortress on.